Welcome back, everyone. Here with us now, Margaret Tolive. She is White House correspondent with Bloomberg, and Martha Moore, national politics reporter for USA Today. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you. Margaret, you are just back from Selma, Alabama. What's the attitude that people there have toward the big commemorations that we're going to see this week?
Yeah, I mean, the entire city of Selma and all the surrounding areas are obviously wrapped up in this huge historic event. But, you know, for Selma, it's like a proud moment, but it's also a time to be able to focus some attention on the city itself. They serve this tremendous spot in U.S. history, but the city itself is really struggling, both in terms of economic development, in terms of retaining their young people when they grow up and leave and go to college, and there's not much to come back for in terms of the way of jobs. They're hoping to try to use this event to galvanize attention and resources back to Selma.
Yeah, you know, some of the most recent attention being paid to Alabama has been around this whole gay marriage issue, and you got the sense that even those who are against gay marriage do not want the state seen as this place where they just fight against progress. Are they trying to make peace with their past, I guess is the question I'm asking.
Well, sure, but you know, as one woman who I met there told me, she said the fight used to be about civil rights and voting rights, and now it's about economic rights. But either way, we have the right to vote, but what good does it do you if you can't afford a house and can't afford to make a life for your children here? And so they really are struggling to kind of reconcile the symbolism of Selma. Everybody thinks, oh, Selma, what a wonderful place. This, you know, important thing happened there, with the reality of it today, which is a lot of boarded up homes and businesses that are closed or part-time, and a real effort, I think, by the people there to use this for some economic good.
So, Martha, you've been spending day and night at CPAC. What has surprised you there?
Well, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but the division of opinion on candidates has surprised me. Scott Walker, not surprisingly, has a lot of support there, and people are very enthusiastic about him. Chris Christie, who came last year and got a warm reaction, this year, not so much. And the people I've spoken to there aren't particularly enthusiastic about Jeb Bush.
Yeah, it's interesting. Neither one of them gave a speech, right? They both showed up and did interviews instead of giving speeches. You think they were worried about the reaction they'd get from the crowd, or the lack thereof?
Well, they were going to have to answer questions regardless, because that's the new format for CPAC, is to put these candidates or proto-candidates through their paces. And I think Christie got a little bit of a hazing with his interview, and so he might not have been able to make all the points that he wanted to and come across as he wanted to. But his whole shtick is that he can answer questions from anybody. That's why he does town halls. So it might have worked in some ways to his advantage.
You know, we had a follower send us a tweet and ask, is Chris Christie toast? And this is actually a subject you tried to address in a story this week. Did you conclude that he is in fact looking, you know, pretty much being dealt out of this presidential race? Well,
I think that the conclusion is that he is not doing well in the so-called invisible primary, where you round up donors and you get a lot of operatives and so on your side. But I do think that in the way we have primaries, with Iowa and New Hampshire being very focused on retail politics, Christie is a very good retail politician. That's how he has run his whole governorship, with doing these endless town halls where he talks to regular people. And I think if he takes that to New Hampshire and is able to answer some difficult questions, it doesn't necessarily, you know, you have to actually play the ball game and see how it works out.
What about Jeb Bush? Did he fare any better?
Well, not many people that I encountered at CPAC are in favor of the Common Core educational standards, and that's a big part of Jeb Bush's appeal. So in that sense, he with the conservative base, he has a big issue. He also has favored an immigration policy that no one at CPAC likes. So he's got his work cut out for him with that group.
Margaret, you're at the White House all the time, covering it for Bloomberg. Tell us just what's the attitude that the White House is feeling now about this speech by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to Congress on Tuesday? Seems to have caused kind of a breach. Is that real? And what kind of consequences do you think that might have?
It is. I mean, it's hard to say whether it's created an animosity or just re-stirred up the animosity that's sort of been there all along. But in 2012, when President Obama was facing re-election, he was you know, a lot more constrained, or he felt more constrained in terms of how much he could express his frustration with dealing with the Prime Minister. And Prime Minister Netanyahu was sort of in a position of being able to put President Obama a little bit more on the spot, understanding American politics and the general electorate, Democratic base, all of the above. the tables are a little bit turned now. President Obama, of course, doesn't have to run for election again, and Prime Minister Netanyahu does, and a lot of what he's doing really is more for an Israeli audience than it is for the U.S. audience. The positions that he's going to take about pressing very hard on Iran, about standing up to the U.S. as a power, and so many of Netanyahu's calculus is about his own domestic politics back home, but it's put the White House in an incredibly awkward spot to find out the way they did, that he's coming and giving this speech to the Republicans.
But is this politics or is this personal between the two men?
It is a little bit personal, but with President Obama, that almost never matters anyways, right? I mean, for him, it really is about sort of pragmatism and being transactional, but there is a line that the White House feels has been crossed in terms of respect and in terms of diplomacy and the way business is done. And they really felt that the Prime Minister did sort of cross that line in a way that goes beyond the norm.
D.C. pot law went into effect last week, legalization of pot, but the Republican Congress seems very upset about it. A committee chairman even threatened to throw the mayor, Muriel Bowser, in jail for it. Were they talking about marijuana legalization at CPAC? And what did you hear?
They were. They had a vigorous debate about marijuana legalization. It was one of the most vigorous discussions that went on. And the pro-pot side was Gary, the former mayor of New Mexico, Gary Johnson, apparently a fan. And there was a lot of argument over the health and safety versus something that's important to conservatives, which is over-criminalization and over-incarceration, which you can argue having pot be illegal leads to.
You know, this sounds like the classic divide between the libertarians and the more, moral conservatives of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
We're going to have to call it right there.
Yeah, Martha Moore, Margaret Taleb, thanks so much for joining us.
We appreciate it. And after the break, Congressman John Lewis, he may not be a superhero, but he's got his own graphic novel. I'll talk to the guy who's helping tell Lewis's story to a whole new generation.